Hello and welcome to Rustacean Station, my fellow Rustaceans. So this is your host, Alan Wyma. I'm going to be doing, hopefully trying to do a weekly interview podcast for the Rustacean Station. And today we are extremely lucky, I think, to have a little bit of a rock star in our hands today. Maybe it's a little bit modest compared to other people, but I think you all know him. Daniel Stenberg, who is the creator or founder of cURL, which I think nearly almost every device out there that's internet connected uses it in some kind of way. Maybe let's go ahead and let Daniel kind of introduce himself really quick, since people may or may not know who you are. Go ahead.
I founded cURL. I started it in 98. I've been working with it since then quite a lot as a spare time project for 20 years or so until I started working full time with cURL in, 2019. So nowadays I work for the Wolf SSL, the company, and I pretty much provide cURL support to anyone who wants it. So I do cURL related projects all day long.
I mean, it's been nearly 30 years, right? So you don't feel, am I wrong, or it's over 30 years already?
Well, my first dabbles into this started in late 1996, so 25 years, yes.
Okay, so you're almost there. I'm sure you'll probably hang around for a while. 25 years, I mean, I don't know how you can stay committed to a project. It's really difficult, I think, at least for most programmers.
Well, sure, but of course I'm here because I'm doing it because I love it and I think it's fun. So I'm continue to work on it. So for me, it hasn't been a difficult journey. I think it's interesting, and I've seen it grow and I've followed it along, and it's sort of part of me, and I'm part of it. And yeah, I guess I just can't stop.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to talk about some recent developments. So you're making me think about recently. Well, it's kind of somewhat recently, right? You had this guy say some not so nice things to you that you wrote a post about, and then I think he came back to you very recently, right? Within this month, and said, "Hey, I'm sorry about saying the things I said." Right?
Yes.
I was just thinking about like how being an open source maintainer, you get a lot of flack, but this guy really stood out.
Yeah, it stood out in both ways, I think. Right, but I mean, as an open source maintainer, of course, I'm used to people complaining and whining about my stuff doesn't work for whatever purpose and it's wrong because whatever because in general people tend to be quiet and happy while they're happy, so they don't. Most feedback you get is negative. So whenever you do something wrong or that someone perceives is wrong or bad, people yell. And so of course as an open source maintainer over the years I've been accustomed to get a lot of complaints, and of course some of the complaints are valid and fine because we mess up somewhere and we fix something we shouldn't have done, stupid things, so we correct it. But sometimes people are just people. And in early this year I got this death threat from a apparently confused person. Well, the more I communicated with him, the more he appeared confused. So I think a death threat was kind of upsetting to begin with, but I think I sort of calmed down after I communicated with him more, because then it became more obvious to me that well, I don't know, I didn't take it as serious anymore. But anyway, so to continue the story, he returned just a few weeks ago and sent me an email and apologized for that death threat. And I'm not sure the apology explained a lot, but he's clearly a person with issues.
Yeah, I was just thinking about. I do remember hearing about this on one of the podcasts. I think it was Changelog, and I thought that was really crazy. And I'm happy that he came back and at least apologized. Right? I don't know. It sounds like you took it as a genuine apology. So I'm happy that the one guy I think that stood out compared to other people who maybe also gave you some not so good comments, that he, hopefully you feel better. It sounds like, right?
Oh yeah, and I think of course it was strong of him to come back with an apology like that. It couldn't have been easy. So of course I appreciate it, and I think it has made me feel much better about the whole situation, really.
I do have another question that kind of rolls back to curl, right? And about people kind of coming back to you. I never think about ever upgrading curl. So like I know curl's on version 7.7 something, I believe I just saw was the most recent one.
Yeah, 7.78. Yes.
Do people ever say like what are you actually updating? Because I don't feel a difference, or is it like quite clear? It seems like maybe protocol changes are the biggest ones, or
Well, I hear that. I hear that so much. And one of uh, I think our strongest things we do with curl, and one of my really sort of biggest areas that I really try to emphasize is to not break behavior, right? To keep compatibility with old stuff, so that you can upgrade curl and your old command lines and your old programs can still work with the latest curl, right? So if you installed libcurl 20 years ago and you upgrade libcurl to the current libcurl, your code can still run with it, or your command lines can still run with it. And that, you know, that's a lot of hard work, but that also makes it even easier for people to react exactly like that. You run your command line, you did it 10 years ago, and you upgrade curl now, and you can run the same command line and it works the same way. And what did we do over all those years? So of course I get that quite a lot. So a lot of curl is changing all the time, but we're making it really. We make a big effort to make sure that it isn't that visible to users. And of course, internet protocols are changing all the time. Like things like TLS is improving, and we're changing HTTP and a lot of things. Best practices on how to do protocols, so we do things safer and default to better protocols or ciphers and stuff like that. So it changes all the time. As much as everything changes on the internet all the time, the protocols are changing. And curl supports a lot of protocols, so there's a lot of protocol stuff to do all the time. And I mean, most of the people are using everyday ordinary stuff, right? So if you're just going in that midstream ordinary protocol things, maybe you never saw a problem with curl, you didn't ever experience anything stupid or bad. You're just happy with whatever you do. But when you have a lot of users like we do with curl, there's always going to be a few that are using it in some very special edge kind of way, and they run into problems. So we have to fix those problems with some particular implementation somewhere, some protocol stuff, and that is happening all the time. We're always running into those little niche kind of problems and fixes, and that iterates, and that never stops really, because there's always new implementations, new users, new setups to use curl and internet.
implementing these protocols, right? So I think Quick is somewhat recent. I don't know if there's any more recent protocols. Maybe you can chime in about that. But I'm just thinking, like, when do you say, okay, it's time to implement this protocol? Like, because I think SPDY or SPY was before HTTP2, and that kind of some of it came into HTTP2, if I remember correctly. But I'm guessing that at some point you must have implemented some pieces of that protocol before everything was formalized, right? So how do you decide when you want to start implementing new protocols?
There's really nothing sort of there's no fixed rules or guides there. I like to have curl being early with protocols, like at least in the HTTP series, like as you said, speedy and HTTP2, HTTP3, quick. Just because I think it's a handy tool to also help other implementers. So if I can provide support early, I can then sort of help facilitate others to implement it better. So it sort of goes hand in hand, and also helps the actual protocol development before the protocol actually becomes a standard. So I try to be early, but it's also a matter of effort and energy. Can I do it, and can we do it, and provide something that works? In the quick case right now, then, which is of course called HTTP3 when it runs over quick. We basically just worked on it early enough, and we have support for it. But in this case, it actually doesn't work 100% yet, and it's not enabled by default yet in curl, because we haven't actually, pulled it all the way through just yet. We're still working on it.
That's interesting because I think I was listening to your podcast again today, and I think you were recommending to skip straight to, or was it you or maybe somebody else? I think somebody was recommending to skip directly to HTTP3 if you haven't done HTTP2 yet, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I've said that in the past, and I still think it might be sensible. It depends. If you're on HTTP1 now, you're probably still on H1 for some reason. So then you at least have you could at least consider skipping 2 and go straight to 3. Of course, going to 3 is also a different beast altogether, since it's over UDP and quick and everything. So it's quite a different thing to deploy, especially server side, I think. So I know it's a challenge for anyone who who want to upgrade to those protocols.
Okay, so H2 is over TCP still?
Yes.
It's not doing, okay.
So H2 is still TCP, and it's using the TCP connection better, I would say, and it can then do multiple transfers over the same TCP connection in parallel. While going to HTTP3, you're going to quick, and quick is done over UDP.
Now, is H3 also using gRPC, or am I remembering wrong?
No. So gRPC is a H2 thing.
Okay, it's H2. Yeah, I haven't gone to H2 yet, as you can see. So
Right.
I do remember somebody talking to me about gRPC recently, or about a couple of years ago, and they're saying that that's one of the newer ones. So that makes sense now. That's a couple of years ago.
It's pretty hardwired onto H2, I think. I mean, they might be able to go to H3 as well. I'm not really a gRPC person, so I can't tell for sure, but they sort of adapted the protocol pretty hard to H2 concepts.
So have you ever just received a PR with some strange new protocol you never heard of and said, well, what is this, and should I even let this in?
Yeah, it happens actually every once in a while. I mean, just in recent time, I've gotten, I don't remember exactly when, a few months ago we got a PR for the Gemini protocol, for example, or Gemini, I guess they call it, which is a lightweight HTTP competitor, maybe a little like Gopher HTTP mix something over TLS. And it's a sort of a new protocol done by some enthusiasts to do more. I guess it's a way for them to do HTTP with less tracking, without cookies, and I'm not sure. But I had never heard about the protocol when they filed the PR, so it can certainly happen. And I got another PR just months ago for another protocol called Sieve, which is a protocol to administrate, I think, email filters for over IMAP. Basically, it's very similar to IMAP. So it still happens. So there are a lot of protocols, and there are a lot of protocols to consider, and it's a difficult question to answer. Should we support this protocol? If someone brings the code, is it reason enough for curl to adopt it, or rather, I mean, where should we draw the line? Why should we adopt it? I mean, it should be. It's difficult.
The regression testing must be really intense, right? You must have a giant CI list in order to kind of keep up with everything, or am I wrong?
Oh yeah, that's certainly a challenge in itself, indeed. So yeah, all the protocols need to be tested and everything. So yes, a lot of CI, a lot of tests, and yeah, that's difficult. And a lot of all those tests over networks and stuff like that also tends to be. A lot of the tests tend to end up flaky, and that's also troublesome.
But I think the next thing I want to ask you, sorry, the questions kind of left my mind for a second. I did want to talk a little bit more about maybe we could start off with more about so you have curl and you have libcurl, and then you also have this idea of backends that you can switch out, right? Maybe we can talk about the architecture, because this is going to lead into the main topic of today.
Right. Yeah. So I started out the project with curl, the command line tool, but pretty soon I realized that I should really rearrange the project so that I can provide a library for other programs than to sort of get internet transfer capabilities. So in the year 2000, I released libcurl the first time, which is then 21 years ago. And since then, we've provided libcurl with a stable API then. And that is really what makes it widely used all over, right? Because everything can use that library everywhere. And in the architecture for libcurl, we have over the years introduced ways to then provide different backends, actually to provide protocol support using different backends. So for example, we started out, I think, with the TLS support. So you can plug in different TLS libraries to do TLS for HTTPS and other protocols that uses TLS. So you can build curl with OpenSSL or GNU TLS or Boring SSL or whatever TLS library you want. You can build curl to use that, or not really whatever, but we support 13 different ones. So basically, you plug in the one you want. And then we've, over the years, done the same kind of backend approach, pluggable approach for different things. Like the SSH support, the quick support, the name resolving, and compression, and now most recently the HTTP support as well. So you can basically at build time select which backend to use for different protocol things.
Okay, so how do you choose which backend to use, right? Because you said you can swap it out at compile time. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's why at build time you have to select which one to build with. And a lot of them you need a third party to provide the code for them. So right, so if you want to build with OpenSSL, you of course then you need OpenSSL. If you want to build with other particular libraries, you need those libraries present when you build them. So that's, for example, if you want to build curl to use Hyper, the HTTP library, you need that library, of course, installed. Then you just pick that when you build curl. And then, of course, most people don't build curl themselves. They get curl from their operating system or built somewhere else. So someone needs to build it with that particular backend enabled.
How can you check to see what's your backend that's enabled?
It's not always that easily visible, but if you run the command line tool, you run curl -V, then you at least see a lot of components and their version numbers on that first line. It doesn't spell it out in clear text, but those are actually components that are used, so they actually sort of hint which backends you're using.
Okay, that's good to know. I'm still, for me, curl always kind of freaks me out a little bit because there's so many different options. So I tend to use wget because I just want to get a file, right? Wget is easy, just grab it.
Yeah.
And then I know with curl you can use -O to get the file out, right? So I can probably just use that from now on.
Yeah, you can.
Okay. Is there any jealousy towards wget and how easy it is to use, or no? You seem like you're this. Oh yeah, you can use that.
No, I never tried to be wget. I never tried to sort of replace wget. I think wget has its purpose. I think curl is different.
Yeah, for me, it's almost like wget is like a VS Code or something, and then curl is a little bit like Vim. It's like I had to learn a little bit more to use it properly.
Yeah, I guess so. So wget is much more focused on download something and make an effort to download it. With curl, it's more of a do HTTP or transfer things that could be a lot of different things depending on what you want to do.
All right, but the meat of this topic is Hyper, right? So where was the idea to actually use Hyper? Because I mean, you're a C guy, right? You've been using C for a while.
I'm a C guy. So now it actually is. It started with the Let's Encrypt people. Well, it was Josh Oss that contacted me about and asked me if I was interested in working with them to increase memory safety in something like curl. They have this project. I don't remember what it's called anymore, but they have this project that they want to help out to basically do more things memory safe. I mean, and then by more things, I mean open source projects and widely used open source projects, pretty much, I guess. So he approached me and asked me how I viewed it, if I would be interested in working on it. And sure, I would, because I think it's an interesting challenge. I think when it comes to like curl and libcurl, the biggest benefits we have, or one of the strong selling points, is not actually the code, but it's stable, and we have an API that is sort of provided since 20 years. So that is what users want and need, right? They want the functionality and the API to remain, but we can certainly replace pretty much all the code as long as we can keep that API and stability. So if we can increase stability and safety by ripping out code and putting in other code instead, that's a fun challenge. And if since they wanted to help out and sponsor that work, I thought it was an interesting thing to do, and they did. And at that point, they pretty much suggested that Hyper could be an interesting library to use for HTTP, since that's a sort of fresh and seemingly mature enough and feature-rich enough library written in Rust, then, so that we could use that and replace not all curl code for HTTP, but a lot of curl code at least for HTTP. So basically replacing C with Rust to get improved memory safety. So that's how we started. And then since while researching that, I asked the Hyper people about the possibility and availability for a C API to the library. Then, since curl is C, I need a library that provides a C API into the Rust library Hyper to actually get all those functions.
What was the reply back? I did see the thread was quite some time ago. I didn't actually get down to the bottom yet, but I was curious what actually happened because I think he was pretty interested.
Oh yeah. So Sean McAllister is his name, I think, right? So he basically responded immediately. So yeah, sure, we want to provide that. We just haven't done it yet. So that's super positive, and they've been super positive all the way. So I have no complaints from me there. So we basically just, I basically expressed my desires and what I wanted to do and what I wanted to, sort of what I was set out to do, and he was very cooperative and thought that was a fun thing to do, and he's been working a lot on his end to provide the library, the APIs and the entry points that I've requested, basically to be able to hook in Hyper to do stuff for curl, so that curl can work like curl but use Hyper as a backend.
So maybe let's kind of go back, right? Because I'm trying to understand, like, if we separate backend and the rest, like how else would you kind of separate the rest? Because when I'm thinking what you're talking about, it almost seems like Hyper does more than what I consider as a backend, right? Because what would be like the things? Where's the stopping point for each piece?
Yeah, because a backend here is a very loose definition. It basically just means that you can replace it with something else. It's sort of a either or situation. You can use that or that. So exactly where the line is really just an internal decision for us. So basically, whatever Hyper can provide HTTP wise, we use. So if there's HTTP stuff, whatever that Hyper doesn't do, we do it internally. And if Hyper provides that functionality, we use Hyper for it. So that's basically a very non-scientific way to draw the line. And so if Hyper would start providing more features that curl uses already, we could shift that line and use even more Hyper for things. So I've only sort of gradually sort of learned Hyper and seen how to do that and how to shift over data into Hyper to get it out and then use it. So it's been a journey, and it's still not, we're not done yet either. So it could still change and develop more. But over the time, of course, then so they created the C API, which is basically then an entry point for C programs to access Hyper. And over time, of course, I've started to use that more and more. I've now run that in CI for curl, and I run a lot of tests all the time. So it works pretty good. It's not there because I have a lot of, it's not completely there. I have, I think I'm at 70 tests something disabled when I build with Hyper, just because it's not actually feature parity yet, which is a little depending on Hyper and mostly depending on me haven't done exactly, the internal juggling with everything correctly just yet.
Actually, so I'm kind of curious because when I think about backend or any kind of piece, right? Usually it's kind of an equal, like, okay, these are the APIs or this is the protocol that they have to speak, and then I just swap out from there. But it sounds like, okay, if I'm going to swap out my quote unquote, like you said, the word backend, if I use this backend, then curl has to do this much. If I do this backend, then curl has to do less or maybe more. Is that how you do the swapping out? It's like very exact like that?
It is like that. And since this is the first HTTP backend we have, I haven't been forced to adapt to anything existing. This is new ground. I'm sort of, I'm twisting and tweaking everything the way we need to. So maybe in the end we can end up with a proper internal backend API and then in the future provide other, have other HTTP backends as options. Maybe if someone would ever do that, but so it's really a lot of trial and error, and try that, try this, and see exactly where should the line be drawn and how should we actually do this. So it's not but I'm trying out a lot of things. So we're going forward, and I think it's ending up pretty nicely. But it's it's a lot of research and testing of things.
I did do some reading, I think, and it seemed like you were pretty happy with it, but still not 100% happy. Maybe that's just my own interpretation. I was kind of curious, like, is it something where you're going to say, you know what, eventually maybe we just switch the default backend to be hyper for most pieces?
I think there's a potential future that we do that. Yes. So I'm really happy with the development so far. So I think we are going to make it more or less feature parity. I think there's going to be some tiny things that are going to be irrelevant, basically because they're going to be so niche and protocol specific that it doesn't really matter. So they might differ in really fringe cases. So sure, but if you're going to use a default or not, I've tried to defer that to others who build curl, since typically we don't build curl ourselves. We just ship source code, so we let those decisions be made by others. And if others are going to select that backend, I think we should do everything in our powers to make sure that it is a feasible option, and then sort of, if users who build curl think that is a good idea, they will use it. So I'm trying to not yet, at least, I'm not forcing anyone to do anything. I actually try to, and for example, when it comes to TLS, we've actively decided to not make a decision which is the default TLS backend, for example, just to not push our views on others. Others get to do that choice by themselves. Which one do we want to use in our build? So I'm thinking maybe we should rather go that way in the future. So you pick and choose when you build curl. So we provide both. And I think it's very important. I mean, even down the road, when this Rust backends for any protocol, I mean, since we have Rust backends in 3 different cases now, at least 4 maybe, Rust provided libraries, I think there's still a huge value for my end users for the C written backends as well. So I need to provide those, and they need to be very good as well. So I need to offer both or all of them going forward as well. Anyway.
Wait, so you're saying you have 3 different Rust backends besides, or 2 other Rust backends besides?
I have so Hyperthen for HTTP. We have Russell's for TLS, and we actually have what's it called? Mesalink also for TLS, which is an older Russell's integration.
Okay, that makes sense. I think I remember hearing about that. Rust TLS was a big part. That was the first piece I think you integrated, right?
Yes, I think so. And then we have Quiche for HTTP3 and Quick.
Yeah, I think I just heard about Quiche recently, so that's interesting. I'm glad I did my research, so I don't have weird words that I never heard before.
So. Yeah, and you know what the fun thing is? Quiche, there are actually 2 different HTTP3 libraries called Quiche.
Different ways of spelling, I guess, right?
No, they actually have the exact same spelling too. The one is Cloudflare and the other is Google. So, but I'm talking about the Cloudflare one.
Yeah, Cloudflare is what I did research. Now you remember.
Yeah, I think they're the public one, because I don't think the Google one is aiming for external users. I think they call it more or less internally.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So again, okay. So all right. So I'm starting to understand a little bit more about when you say backend, right? It's really just another piece, because Rust TLS is obviously different than Hyper.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So we have different backends for HTTP. We have different backends for TLS. We have different backends for HTTP3. So all of those have different groups of backends. So yeah.
Maybe another word would be like a component or something like that.
Yeah, you could call it that. Yeah, exactly. Or sort of just puzzle pieces, and you have to pick your combination that you want.
Okay, that makes sense. It's pretty interesting. So you can actually basically, I'm curious, if I decide to build my curl with as much Rust as you guys have integrated, how much do you think is actually Rust that I could put together? Like, we're talking about 60%, 70%?
Well, so you could then use Rust for TLS and HTTP and HTTP3 right now. And right, HTTP 1, 2, 3, and the TLS. The TLS parts. It's a bit of a strange situation with Quick. But so yeah, a lot of data could be handled, and you could actually probably get more than 60% if you disable other protocols. Since you can, when you build curl, you can also disable stuff you don't want. So you could disable protocols that are not written in Rust. So
I think I heard somebody tell me recently that I think it was Sweden has the most happiest people. Is that true?
Yeah, we're usually rather high up in that ranking.
So the same person who told me that about 5 seconds later also said they had the most suicides. So I thought that was a very weird. So I was just trying to think that the comment I'm trying to make is like, you know, uh, if you start taking things away, then obviously you start looking better, right? The percentage can go up if you remove things.
Yes.
That's my morbid sense of humor, right? So excuse that, listeners, if you didn't like my morbid sense of humor. But yeah, this is pretty cool though. So now I want to ask, right? So you've been programming for a while. Maybe you weren't very happy I called you a C guy, but you have quite a bit of experience at C. I could definitely say that.
Yes, I'm definitely a C guy. Yes.
Okay. Uh, how was it when you started working with Rust the first time, right? Because I understand C is there. It's really like Wild West in terms of there's no stable build system. It's not easy. Like a lot of things are just not built into the ecosystem when you install C, right? You basically have GCC or something similar. And you have to assemble the pieces yourself.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So when you program C, you have a much smaller toolbox with things already provided for you. That is certainly true. But I mean that is what a lot of us have been doing for a lot of years, right? To provide those toolboxes for others, so that you want to build something, there are libraries and existing things that others have built that you can use. So sure, and over time you also tend to build those little things yourself. So for example, in curl, of course, we have a lot of those little things that you might get from an external dependency when you fire up your Rust code today. We have written ourselves over the years in curl, of course, because we need them, which also has its benefits. I mean, of course, it makes it's more error prone and is more work, but it has its benefits for us. For example, that is, we have an extremely portable engine, so now we can run it, can build curl and run it virtually anywhere, which is hard to do otherwise.
So coming into, I mean, okay, so you've had this background of building up your own toolbox, and that makes a lot of sense too. I mean, when at least in my house, of course, you always buy your first, wrench or screwdriver, but then you slowly build up your garage or your, like you said, your toolbox. But then now it's like you're coming in and there's already something there, right? Was that a good feeling, or was that like maybe I don't really trust this stuff because I didn't create this or didn't assemble it myself? Like, what's kind of the feeling?
No, I think as someone who is providing such a tool for others and say you should trust libraries that are provided by others if they're good. I think it's only sensible to lean on others, and of course the challenge is only to figure out who to lean on, of course, and who's reliable and who's not. But I think that's just something you need to do as a part of development process, basically. So I think we're all going that way, even if C as a language doesn't provide that built-in infrastructure. I think we're going that way anyway. Everyone is using a lot of different components and pieces today anyway. Whatever language you write it in, you're not writing everything your own. That was a long time you did that. So nowadays, I mean, there's not a single software project out there in any language who isn't using a lot of open source or other components that someone else wrote. I think what differs then in C and many of the other more modern languages is that the modern languages tend to provide that infrastructure, or how to handle those other components and pieces in a more organized way already from the beginning. Like with Rust, you get cargo and everything with that sort of. It comes with a language. You don't have to glue it in afterwards.
I'm guessing that must have been a very welcome experience, right?
You mean with Rust?
Well, I mean, coming to Rust, right, where you came from C, you
Yeah,
didn't have to build it.
I think it's a welcoming thing in one way. It's also sort of a little bit of a scary and fascinating ride to see that everything is changing all the time. So I sometimes get people who get word and they see, well, I build curl and it can use 30 different dependencies. And then I build Hyper and I see, oh, Hyper uses 65 just out of the box without and so, sort of without even starting to do anything. So yeah, it's a little bit of that, and of course it becomes much more moving. So everything moves much more. So it's an interesting. I think I guess that is also going to be about of a challenge to users of things like curl built with hyper, for example. In when you want to ship that in Linux distros or whatever, they need to ship a lot of Rust libraries, of course, and stuff like that. So they need to adapt their infrastructure and build environments for that as well. So it's going to sort of rely on others to handle that properly before it can become really widely used and adopted in curl on places like that.
Yeah, that it kind of reminds me of like that whole left pad kind of JavaScript issue where you pull in something and it's maybe doing something very small. I'm not sure how. I think Rust people are a little bit better than that, but yeah, I do get a little bit worried about when I pull stuff in. I see everything compiling and it's like, at least 30 dependencies long. It's a little bit worrisome.
Yeah, at least something to sort of keep in mind. That is certainly a challenge to handle and operate with.
So another kind of question, and I think that definitely pops out, like, and I thought it's kind of weird, is the whole like async await within Rust, right? Where you want to run asynchronous code, but you also have to include your own runtime for asynchronous, right? I think Piper must be using Tokayo.
Yes, it does. And yeah, that has the extension for something like me then who's using it as a C user, that we get a slightly unusual API as the C library for Hyper then provides that functionality sort of abstracted away for a C user. So I more or less push jobs and I have to pull things and sort of, over time something else gets back when it has been executed. So it makes it a slightly unusual API, but otherwise I don't have to care a lot about exactly how it's done within the Rust world.
Well, actually, the part that's a little bit weird too is like if you do want to include some asynchronous piece, right? And let's say that you're using Tokayo, but somebody else is using another, I forgot what they're called again, these asynchronous runners. Then you actually have to combine two into one binary, right? Your whole thing gets much bigger. I'm just a little bit surprised that I wish there was a way that you could just, as your own, just choose what you want, but it seems like you don't have that kind of choice.
All right. But now you're getting into territory that isn't really my my territory. So since I'm not really that much into Rust, I'm more into using those Rust libraries. So I haven't really. But I mean, you're touching on a good subject. But for me, as a user of the library, it doesn't really matter because I'm not going to introduce another asynchronous engine because I'm using it from C. But I can see other interesting challenges. So I know, for example, there are interesting challenges if you just want to build two different libraries, both using Rust. Since I know Rust is a little bit keen on providing static libraries, and when you build two different libraries, they might use the same symbols. So then you link them from two different libraries, and then you might end up in a fun situation unless you have your things ordered right, because they might be different versions or collide with each other's symbols. So there are certainly things that are still, needing some details and figure out how to do in the future. And of course, we can also come back to the panic and what happens when you run out of memory and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think Linus was talking about this recently, right? That he was saying no matter what, you cannot just be panicking, right? So you're also saying this is also another issue. What do you expect to do, though? What do you really expect to do?
I appreciated Linus's comment there, because that was exactly what I said when I started this in the Hyper. I mean, well, when you run out of memory, you should return failure and you should return it. You should not do exit. You should not panic. You should not do anything. As a library, I think the responsibility of a library is do whatever you can, and if you can't, you return an error, and you don't lose any memory, you don't leak anything. So I think when the library, even if the library is written in Rust or whatever language it's written in, it should just bail out, free all memory, and return a failure. That's what I think it should do. That's basically what Linus Torvalds said too. And I know that there's this issue in PR for Rust to provide that, or to walk back those panics so that you can do that on a panic. And we do that in curl, so that and for curl, for example, it's a very important thing. If you use it on a really tiny embedded system with very limited amount of memory, you don't want it to crash just because you couldn't do some little transfer right now. You might want it to fail, try again later, or clean up your memory and then try again. It can't, there's no option to not just fail.
Yeah, I guess I have a different way of thinking. That's because I come from Erlang Elixir background, where you just fail is the is the default way of thinking.
Right, but and I think that might be what you want to do, but that's not up to the library to decide. You don't link with the library. A transfer library cannot decide for the application. We're going to nuke everything when we can't do what we want. That's not up for us. That's for the application to decide, so they can do it. If we return a failure, sure, reboot or whatever you want to do, but we don't take that decision. Someone else does.
That's a pretty interesting problem to have, because let's say, yeah, so is Hyper doing that now, or you actually talk with them to stop this kind of behavior?
Every Rust library does this because Rust cannot handle it properly yet. So yeah, it's one of these things that is being worked on, as far as I know. I haven't really followed it closely, so I might be talking slightly out of time, but it's a thing to fix.
This is a good topic, right? Because like I said before, we were chatting a little bit before, I want to hear, things that you like and things that you don't like, and this is definitely a valid thing to dislike, right? Is there anything else that you kind of dislike?
No, not really. That has remained the sort of the main one, handle out of memory. Otherwise, I think I don't have a lot of. I don't think I can think of anything that I don't like. That is sort of that Rust brings as a language. So now, of course, we can discuss things like what APIs I have to the libraries I use, but they're not caused by Rust. So no, I think Rust is a good way to do memory save things, and I think the integration with C and the ability to use from C is really handy. And I think this is there are not many other languages that you can do it this way with this ease and this flexibility. So I don't think I couldn't use much else than exactly Rust, for example, replace parts of curl like this. So I think it's an excellent way. There are things to do to sort of polish the experience going forward. But I'm sure we can go there.
All right. Even the borrow checker wasn't an issue for you, or maybe just in the beginning it was a little bit of so when you write your code, you have some checking that happens at compile time to make sure that you're not, the ownership model, these kind of things.
Yeah, but there again, no, I haven't suffered much from that, because I have the luxury of having someone who writes the C library for me, since Sean and the Hyper project provides that. So I haven't really delved into that, but I'm sure that since C doesn't have that protection and everything, the ones who write the actual library to interface Rust, they of course have that challenge. You get the untrusted code into the Rust library, and the Rust library has to export it out to the C library again. So that back and forth, of course, is a challenge to get right. But I don't think that has caused any problems. I think no. I can come back to the way this async thing typically works in Rust is a very unusual way for C programs, which makes it, for example, we pass in a lot of things, data to the Rust in the API, then to the Rust library, and the Rust library then handles that pointer, for example, much later on in time, which is really hard if I, for example, happen to pass in a null pointer, which I wasn't supposed to do. It might be handled by Rust a long time later, 25 stack frames, 0.2 seconds later, which makes it really hard sometimes to understand what I did caused this. I mean, the causation is really hard sometimes to see that what I did caused this. What did I do that made it crash like this? So it's been some adventures like that for me. The debugging is not always very easy, but I don't think that's not really a Rust sort of con. It's more like I just have to learn it and overcome those challenges.
Okay, so you're actually not writing much Rust yourself, right? You're mostly sticking to C and working with the Rust libraries.
Yes, exactly. So I try to just because I'm not a Rust guy. I don't think I'm very productive in Rust, so I'd rather just try to not complain, but say what I want and try to provide feedback and bug reports when something. So we try to work it out together. I come with from my C point, C view, and the others provide the code from the Rust side for me to interface.
Okay, so that's pretty interesting. So your interaction with Rust has just been kind of from the outside using the C API, and you're pretty happy with that. Do you actually feel a difference, or I guess just because the async stuff is definitely the difference part, and I guessing just interfacing is just probably the difference between the two.
Yeah, so there's really, I don't, I don't even have to think about it being Rust, right? So I just have an API that I need to interface, and I send in data comes out. So I don't have to think about it being Rust at all, mostly. Um, so no, it's actually pretty great.
And does it give you any better feeling that you're going to get that kind of memory safety and get some kind of safety out of it when you actually work with it, or you just feel, oh no, this is just normal library, no big deal?
More both, I would say. So, I mean, it's just a normal library, so that's not a big deal. But it's then, of course, and that is good, right? Out of a usability standpoint, and for my integration standpoint, that is good. And if that then in extension brings better code safety or memory safety, that is also good. So I think it's just a number of good things piled on top of each other.
That all sounds great. Is there any more plans for getting more kind of Rust pieces involved that maybe are different libraries? So we talked about Quiche already. You talked about RustTLS. You talked about Hyper. Is there anything else maybe that you're looking at doing, or you're just kind of seeing what's going on and kind of evaluating?
Yeah, there are. I mean, there is really no limit to what we can replace. I've said it before, and I don't plan to sort of wholesale convert entire curl once in one blow to Rust, but I think converting piece by piece like this is an excellent way to just get more and more Rust code involved. And I don't have any specific plans right now to for any other components or backends, but I have talked to people, and there are some suggestions and ideas of what to do. So there might be more components, uh, especially for some of the this more standardized functions that might be popular or attractive to other software tools, or whatever that we do that others also do. That's we can write in Rust and maybe using curl as well. I don't know. It could be IDN handling or compression or URL parsing or things like that. So there's certainly more areas that can be replaced like this. But I don't have any specific plans for it right now. I'm actually I have enough work right now to get the hyper stuff to complete.
I think I'm kind of curious about, like, are you looking at bringing more kind of pieces just to kind of keep the project alive? So I think Linus was kind of looking at Rust for a couple different reasons. One is to kind of that safety. The other one is to also bring in some fresh blood, because I think he mentioned that it's harder and harder to find C developers, right? My whole thing out here is like people are all doing JavaScript, Python, some Java, but that's even seems like it's getting less and less unless you're working in a bank or some financial institution. Do you also think that Rust could also be a tool where it could actually help curl survive in case like people just aren't picking up C nowadays, or do you have a different mindset about that?
Yeah, it could possibly be that. I haven't really thought about it from that angle, but sure, it could work out that way. I think all of the above, really. So I think it also, I mean, it works. It helps then memory safety. It helps attracting another kind of developers. It also makes the project maybe more interesting to participate just in general. And it also, so there's a lot of things that could be positive. Of course, also slightly negative because it's going to change a lot of things. So whatever you know about curl, it's going to change. But I think pretty much I'm just trying it out. So I think if it works, it works, and then we're going to go with it. If it doesn't work, we're just going to drop it anyway. Pretty much just continue trying things like we've been doing for a long time. So I think if it turns out to be a good thing, then it'll stick, and we'll see more of it going forward. Pretty much.
I'm actually kind of curious. Like, do you have any kind of words to say to people who are, like yourself, that basically stuck with C for a while, and maybe do you think that they should kind of give Rust a try to see if it could be interesting or to them, or do you just say, okay, whatever works for you, just keep chugging along, or do you have any kind of input from that side?
I think.
Just be honest, please. To be
Oh.
honest, it's okay.
Oh no, I think usually what I think it goes back pretty much to when people ask me what I should contribute to in open source. I think it's better if you stick to what you think is fun. So if you think C is the ultimate fun and you want to stick to it, then stick to it, because I think it's better that you do something that you enjoy and you want to keep doing, rather than doing something you don't think is fun. But if you think C is fun and you're interested in trying out, neighboring technologies and maybe neighboring technologies that might actually have a slightly different kind of future, then trying out Rust seems like an obvious choice. And I think Rust is one of those neighboring technologies to C that really has, it has its future in a better way than C does. So yeah, sure. I think it could be really useful if more people got into that, and of course then could help out in curl.
I'm actually kind of curious. Have you ever taken a look at Zig before? Because that's another kind of a little bit competing technology with Rust.
No, I haven't.
Okay, no interest.
I'll admit that I'm usually so stuck up with my own little corner, so I don't spend a lot of time researching a lot of other technologies. So I sort of, if they're persistent, I sort of can't avoid them like Rust. So I sort of eventually I sort of have to realize them and read up and understand them a little bit. But a lot of things I just sort of glance over and leave it alone until someone really hit it over my head and say that I need to take a look at it.
Okay, and I think the last question I have is, as somebody who is interfacing with Rust libraries, right? You already talked about asynchronous, and kind of like that's something to kind of be aware of and think about, that the error may come back much later than you expected. Is there any kind of other warnings or tips or any kind of other things you think that people who are starting to integrate maybe C with Rust, so still writing C as you're doing right now, but integrating Rust libraries, is there any kind of things you want to give out?
I'm not sure. No, I don't think I have enough of that. So since most of my experience is limited to just how I work with Hyper, and I don't think I can extend that to in a generic. This is how it's going to work. C versus Rust. So I don't think so. But it's stuff like that is going to be a challenge. And another thing is. Related to the, as I said, pass in a pointer and the Rust library will use it much later. It's also the other way around. So if, for example, when you get a memory leak, that something that you got returned from the hyper library that you were supposed to free with another call to the hyper library, when that is not free, then you get a memory leak somewhere. It is also similarly challenging to understand where what should I do now? Says it's that cross-language barrier doesn't it increases complexity when debugging stuff like that. I'm not saying that it's actually anything anyone can do about it, but it's sort of suddenly you just realize that, wow, my memory leak is now in that Rust library. So apparently I should do something about it, but what?
Yeah, that I have had a lot of people who cross, what do you call that, cross programming platforms or whatever. This is definitely an issue. Once you surrender memory, it's and they don't clean it up properly or whatever.
Right, and that could be a challenge in any situation. It could be a challenge, but I think when the cross-language thing, it adds even more challenges to understand what happens and when.
Sometimes you're expecting something to also get cleaned up and it just doesn't for whatever reason. Maybe the ownership is just not there.
Exactly, yeah.
That's pretty cool. I really enjoyed having you here. Is there anything you kind of want to sign off on, or any new projects or something that you're interested in, or you want to kind of let people know about?
No, I don't think so. I do curl as much as possible. That's what I do.
Is there?
No, I actually do a few other projects too, but everything. Most of what I do is circling around curl. So I do a lot of other projects too, but they're related.
Is there? How can people who are listening to this podcast maybe reach back out to you if they want to know maybe how to get involved with curl or anything else?
Well, maybe the easiest, you can follow me on Twitter as Bagder, or DM me there, or you can just email me I'm at daniel.hacks.se, haxx.se. So you can go there. That's my site. That's my email and everything. I think that's the easiest way. And just go to curl.se, the website, and read about curl. And there's also, how to start helping out and contribute and everything. So it's a fairly low key, easy project to get involved with. We're old and we've existed for a while. We have a lot of contributors, but in the end, we're just very few people who actually stick around regularly. So we're, a handful of dozen of people who drive this forward.
That's great to hear. I'm really happy you guys keep it alive because yeah, I can't imagine life without curl. So that's I'm happy you're still sticking alive with it and still going strong. So thanks so much for taking the time to come onto the podcast. I was very happy that you could make some time for this. I feel like you're a pretty busy guy with all the world resting on your shoulders and making sure that doesn't fall apart someday, right? So thanks so much for making the time.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much.